I should give a bit of background. So I am a parent carer of two young men now. For years I said I've got two boys. I can't call them that anymore. One's 25. Um, that's my son Jamie, who has a diagnosis of Asperger's, so autistic, but actually works, and he has two jobs. Fends for himself, has great friendships, and yeah, keeps surprising me in a joyful way. And I have a younger son called Chris, and I have asked him if it's okay to share his story, and he didn't object. And the reason I say that is because I can't actually, I can't get a straight answer from Chris verbally. I have to test things out with him, ask him a few times and see how he responds, because he has autism and learning disabilities. And at the age of just under 16, he also developed epilepsy. So he's got quite a lot going on. And he has the kind of autism which made it very difficult for him to learn the point of using language. Why bother? So he understands quite a lot, tends not to use that many words, although he is able to use words when he's highly motivated and when he really wants to get a point across. So that's a description of us, and the circumstances for how we needed to find a new home for Chris, they're quite extreme. And Bill talked about people with hefty reputations, and Chris was very much walking that path. So the epilepsy, the onset of epilepsy, meant that he had to go on to certain medications, basically to keep him alive because of the severity of his seizures. And that medication doesn't come without side effects. And we went through quite a journey on getting him onto the right medication. And we were also struggling to find the right kind of education for Chris. He went right the way through primary and secondary school in mainstream with very, very good support, one-to-one support. And after that, we had a bit of a hiatus because there wasn't an appropriate setting that was mainstream for him. So we spent a couple of years hunting around, and yeah, it was difficult. Times were really difficult. And this was just after his epilepsy diagnosis. And then we found a college placement, which wasn't mainstream, but seemed to be a possibility. And for the first year that worked very well, and Chris was living here in the family home, seemed to be enjoying his time at college. And then there was a very I heard people talking earlier about trauma, and I believe that Chris had a traumatic experience in that he wasn't directly involved, but there was a fire at the college in the building where he was educated. And when he went back to college after that summer, there was a lot of disruption. There was a lot of differences. There had been a lot of changes. Staffing was different, and he really did not cope. He had a complete meltdown and started to be expressing himself in very aggressive ways. And it was really him communicating the fact that he didn't want to be there anymore. It was really straightforward. So the college actually struggled to support him. And in the end, they gave him a one-day exclusion. And I really had a problem with that. So I withdrew him and immediately called an emergency EHCP review. And that review was really, really helpful. And it was also the start of Chris really being recognised as someone who could be on the Transforming Care Dynamic Register in our local authority. So we needed to find a way of supporting Chris through this trauma. And for a year, I had care staff living with us in the family home and learning how to support Chris and how to understand his needs. And it was quite difficult to, as Bill said, to have lots and lots of different staff. So I started putting my foot down and saying we need some consistency, because that's what Chris's autism really requires. And if we're going to look at the long term, we also need him to have his own space where he really feels like he's in control, because in the family home, he doesn't have much control at all. And it was traumatic for myself and my son to have gone through the difficult times with Chris and to still be in that situation where he was being cared for by other people, but we were still having to kind of almost hang around in the background. And then COVID hit, and so all my hopes for looking for somewhere for Chris to live kind of had to come to a halt, because the local authority weren't actually, I had put Chris on the housing register very early on. Actually, can we go to the next slide? Because I think that's got some things on it. Yeah, so at 18, we'd had the situation where Chris had obviously become an adult, but his needs were so significant that he was deemed to only have limited mental capacity for limited numbers of decisions. It was clear that he would need further education and training, but that's a whole other story, very complex one, which I won't go into here. He wasn't a minor anymore, so my parental responsibility had lapsed, and effectively discussions with social care started to be around, well, does he have the capacity to make this decision, and if not, who does make that decision? So we had the mental capacity assessment about how his care was planned and who would be supporting him, and so that had to go to a best interest decision because he couldn't retain the information long enough to make a decision. So yeah, we basically had to do quite a lot of work with the social worker around that, to get that to get the care package defined in a way that wasn't taking every decision away from Chris, but was also in his best interests. Next slide, please. So the things that we had to consider were whether we could use power of attorney, court of protection, deputyship, which one of those, and it was clear that for Chris, he really does not have a concept of money. It's too abstract, it's not concrete enough. And that's partly to do with the fact that we don't actually really use money anymore. We just tap cards on funny little machines, don't we? So spending money is a concept that's really hard for him. So we had to apply for court of protection deputyship in order to be able to get Chris on this housing list to advocate for his needs, and then to sign a contract, a tenancy for whatever place he was going to live in. And I found it very important to have really specific conversations with the social housing providers around what kind of spaces Chris needed. He is still having 2-to-1 support. That's partly because some of his behaviours become very distressed. When he's out in the community, he can become a danger to himself and others. So 2-to-1 support was deemed necessary. And that's not all the time, it's just that you don't know when it might be necessary. So that's how that worked out. So we also then needed a 2-bedroom accommodation for him. It couldn't just be 1 bedroom. And we managed to have the housing people understand that, so that we could then bid on properties. That's the system in my county, is that you bid on local authority housing properties. So I had to do that on my son's behalf. So that's another reason I needed the deputyship. And I only then became aware that there was a possibility of having a mortgage for him. I mean, I'd heard about it previously, but then I started to think about the fact that, well, he's got this housing association property, or he might have a housing association property, and then there might be the right to buy. So that's something that I'm hoping to look at in the future. And I know the organisation is called My Safe Home, and they do mortgages which are based on people's income from their benefits. And that is a possibility, but there is also the need for a deposit, usually quite a big deposit. So then I also found out that the JMS Trust can offer deposits. It's an organisation which is obviously a charity. They do funding for very, very small supported living arrangements to fund the properties themselves. I'm not clear on how many people need to be in that supported living, in each supported living arrangement. I'm not sure that they do it for individuals. I think it might be 2 or 3 people sharing a space, but I need to clarify that. But it's all on their website, so if you Google JMS Trust, you'll find their details. It was also quite complicated to consider. It was disaggregating the household finances to try and work out whether Chris's benefits would actually cover everything he needed. So that's a consideration as well, because obviously he'd lived here all his life and all of his costs had been part of the family budget. So it was important to start thinking about what things would cost. And it's really important, if you want to get the best deal, if you like, is to look at the utility companies, obviously even more so now with the prices potentially being hiked. But there are things like the warm home discount, and there are also really good schemes in a lot of the bigger utilities providers that give you the option of registering an alternate person for them to deal with and to speak to, so that the utilities can be in the person's name, but you can be spoken to and you can ask them to do certain things or fix things or arrange appointments. So that's a useful thing to know, that a lot of them do that. And there's also, of course, council tax reductions, which I really had to go through quite a lot of discussion with the council about that. And there is this thing about, it's a horrible term, I think, you have to declare the person as having a severe mental impairment. And I really detest that phrase, but that was what was needed. So yeah, in the end, we did look at more than one property. We did consider more than one place for my son. So I think on the next slide, we go to that. This is a picture of a property we looked at, which was actually a private rental that we'd heard about. So, you know, be open to the options. It can be a lot more expensive than local authority housing, but if it really suits the person, then it's great. And this is a place we looked at before we found the property that my son's in now. And because my son had that kind of dynamic register labeling, if you like, it was we also had input from the local community sort of crisis team, but they're basically the assessment and treatment service, the community assessment and treatment service, and they offered to send their occupational therapist out to look at the properties to give an assessment of whether they thought that it was suitable. And it was good to have that sort of second opinion, if you like, instead of going in quite blind, not being sure about whether it would work or not. So if we go to the next slide, I think this is possibly the last one. So here's just pictures of the interior of Chris's house that he's living in now. The middle one's him with his bedroom, which is almost kitted out as a sensory room for him, which is fantastic. And the property even came with a small, completely walled garden, and he does need outside space. So that was one of the big issues that was going to be, I thought was going to be difficult to find the property. But this was, this location is a new build estate, which is across the other side of the town where I live, and it's great because it's about, it would probably take about 45 minutes to an hour to walk between the two houses, but it's literally only a 10 or 15-minute drive between the two. So I feel like I'm far enough away, but still close enough to get there if I really need to. So Chris, again, has a care team. There's currently 11 people covering 2-to-1, 24/7 support for him, which I think is, it would be difficult to drop below that and still be able to cover holidays and sickness, because it's 4 people who have to work every day. So you have to take that into account. And for the moment, I'm really happy with this arrangement, and the guys have got to know Chris. They are all guys, I have to say, have got to know Chris really well. But I'm keeping a weather eye on what Bill mentioned about whether it's a small organisation that really understands and knows each, you know, everybody knows each client or each person they support. And that's something that has been changing with the organisation that we get the support from. And I'm keeping an eye on that because I know it would be very easy for this to deteriorate quite quickly if I can't stay on top of it. And for the moment, what I would say is that I thought that I would have to give this a go. We got the house in May 2021. We signed the tenancy on the house. It's kind of a coach house with stairs up and then everything's on the second floor, which for someone who isn't physically disabled is fine. And it also means it's kind of semi-detached. So some of the sounds that Chris can make can be very disturbing, and I couldn't see him being in a flat that had lots of other units around it. So that was good. But I think the essential thing for me is that I've kind of kept a room for him up until recently. I've kept his room the way it is in my house, thinking if it all goes pear-shaped, I can bring him back here. The staff can come back here. We've done it before. We know we can do it. It won't be ideal, but that, you know, that could happen. And touch wood, because you never know. So far, my son hasn't actually wanted to come back here and spend another night here. I've offered him the option, and he just wants to go home because he really feels like that new house is his. It's not mum's house. It's not anybody else's. It's his. And I think he feels really in control there. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jo. That's absolutely fantastic, and so much useful knowledge for people. And you know, I think you mentioned lots of things, and I know Alice posted up My Safe Home and various things, but there will be some more materials that will come out as well this afternoon, or not this afternoon necessarily, but after this, with the slides later today or tomorrow. Any questions for either Bill or Jo? Because we did say we'd give a few minutes for that at the end. Lots and lots of people applauding you there. You can see Jo, I'm sure. Judith.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you so much. Can you hear? Have I unmuted properly? I haven't got my camera on. Sorry, took it off for a minute. Just thank you. That was brilliant. Really lovely to hear, and the kind of thing the path I hope to go down. But I wondered how difficult it was to get that care package agreed and how you went about that. And I wanted to ask you whether you were employing those staff yourself. I think you said you're going through an organisation. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it is a fairly small organisation, and it's quite an interesting organisation in that they do a variety of types of care, and they've gone into supported living with only a few clients and some very stable teams around those clients. So, but they do also have a home care arm, so they can bring in staff in emergencies to cover for team members that might go out, which is quite useful. It's not ideal, I understand that, but it's better than me having to do it. And this is my concern, is that I do know a number of people. I'm really connected with a lot of families who have gone down the route of employing and training and, you know, all of that. And for Chris to have that many staff he would need for a day, and for me to have to manage that kind of size of package I felt that was a bit too daunting. If it was a one-to-one, that might be different and I might be able to step in, but just being able to guarantee that 2-to-1 provision, I think I would find that difficult to manage. And yeah, did it take a lot to get that package? I suppose I'm quite determined, and I did have a good relationship with the local authority, with the 0 to 25 team. They know me because I've been around the block. I was one of the partners in policy making graduates in Hertfordshire, and then I ran the Eastern Region courses for a while. So they know me and they know I don't give up. And actually that is really what works, I think. Being determined and saying, I know that my son has a right to this and that and the other, and being really sure about that. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well done. Long way.
Thanks. Fingers crossed it carries on, because you never know.
No, you're on it. So well done you.
Thank you.
It is 1 o'clock and I'm kind of conscious that quite a lot of people have got to leave, but are there any other questions? Lots of positive responses to both Bill and Jo. Claire?
I just wondered who you actually ended up going with. Was it housing association, or who's the landlord, or did you buy, or what?
Well, in the end, we looked at the private rental, and it was kind of like touch and go. Do we do this or not? And then this other property came up, and it just seemed so much more suited to my son's needs and closer. It was geographically closer. That was a big issue, actually. That did make quite a difference. Went with the housing association. It's Stonewater, who are agents for Legal and General, and that name in itself, that kind of made me feel they're a long established, you know, housing provider. And I'm hoping, I'm not sure yet whether we'll get to the point of doing the right to buy, because we could then potentially purchase the property if it stays suited to Chris. That might be something we look at down the line. Yeah. But that was why I went for the housing association thing as well, because that is a possibility. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. We've got some other hands up. Rosemary.
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to raise, and it's been raised in the chat, how much parents have to take on in all of this. You know, Jo says she's really determined, and you really have to be, and it is a huge burden for parents. And then the worry that, you know, you've got to be on top of it forever. Yeah. You know, and we don't get any younger. Our young people don't get any younger. And I, you know,
I can't agree with you more, Rosemary. It is a worry. And one of the things that I have done, and I may regret this, but it seemed like the right thing to do at the time, is so I've got power of attorney for finances for my younger son. And what I've done, not power of attorney, I've got deputyship. We couldn't get power of attorney because he can't give permission to us to be his attorneys. He's not deemed to have that capacity. So what I've done with the deputyship is I've also got my older son as a deputy as well. So, and I'm gradually kind of showing him the ropes, if you like. It may be that he doesn't want to do it in the end, but I just thought I've just got to open up all the options. But I do agree with you, there is an awful lot that is required of families, and if you're in a local authority with a situation where the information is really hard to come by, it is a struggle. It's a lot of hard work. It is, and that's part of the reason I didn't want to also manage my son's staff team on top of everything else. I felt that was a step too far for me. Yeah.
I'm thinking of doing the same thing in terms of the deputyship for my son and having my older son on there as well. And I noticed Kate has said about caring for someone at home. So also, I mean, I think, you know, whatever situation our young people are in, it's a real worry as they are older, and a huge commitment. But thanks, it was a really, really great story and well done.
Rosemary, on the thing about the work of families, when we were talking to some of the people and families who connect with the small supports organisations, we found a number of families who are actually really comfortable with handing the management function over to the people who led those organisations. And the reason they had comfort in doing that was because the organisations were small, the organisations were local, on almost none of them are private, so there wasn't something about them being sold on. And there was something about extraordinary transparency in the books. So do you know what I mean? So this is the amount of money that's coming in. This is what it costs us to manage that money. And then this is the money that you as a family and individual control. So one of them, I'm thinking, 87 pence in every pound that comes in is controlled by the individual and the family. Genuine. So I think there's something about, you might not feel comfortable giving that control to some of those bigger national or profit-driven organisations, but there are some small organisations who actually do get the partnership business.
I think it is all about trust, isn't it? You need to be able to trust somebody else with your young person, and I guess those small organisations can provide that because they are that much smaller and can show you the control that you can have.
And for me, there's something in there that's really important about how honest are they? Are they CQC registered as excellent? Do they open their books? Will they talk about complaints? And all that kind of stuff seems to give a bit of confidence.
I agree. It's really important to have that confidence. And I mean, I've raised a couple of safeguarding incidents, and I'm very happy with the way that they've been dealt with. Not happy that they've arisen, but they have. But the way that they've been dealt with was very transparent. Also with the finances, the company that I'm using were really clear about how much they are getting from the local authority and how much they are spending. And we're also totally clear on how much of a training budget they have for the staff. So I know that they're being paid for 4 hours a week of training for the staff, which is a lot when you think about it. So, you know, all of that is really important. It is about having that trust in the organisation, and it's hard to get there, to overcome that, to try it out. But I kind of couldn't really see another way. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.